Hello everyone, welcome to another series of lecture on the political institutions and processes in Northeast India. Today I will be delivering a lecture on India's Look East policy. I will begin by talking about the evolution of world politics, especially at the international arena, particularly looking at how international relations actually changed in the post-Cold War period and how this has compelled India to shift its focus from the West into the East. I will begin by, in my lecture, I will therefore begin by talking about the nature of relationship that India has always had with the Southeast Asia from the beginning of the very early century, maybe the first century onwards, and how this relationship actually was halted, especially during the British time and in the post-colonial period. And then in 1990, with Narasimha Rao government taking taking measures to liberalize the economy, India also started engaging with Southeast Asia and the other neighboring countries. So therefore, from that I will then discuss about the different phases of the Look East of this particular policy, and then we will in the later phase talk about the impact of Look East policy on the Northeast region. So at the very outset, we must understand that since the beginning of liberalization, especially from the mid-1980s, the world has witnessed a shifting nature of global politics. Ever since, various forms of regionalism have dominated global politics. So, global regionalism then emerged as the new mantra of a government's priority and those of non-state actors in their international relations policies. So, with all these happening, the revitalization and expansion of regional projects around the world have then impacted the nature of international politics and how nations actually revive their economic relations across borders. The most pervasive example, you see, of such a deepening and widening impact of regionalism is the European Union. We have seen how European Union has actually consolidated themselves and have over a period of time have become one of the most prominent forces, especially when we talk about regional politics and at the international level. So you see, with European Union actually showing the way, there are other regions as well across the world who have also reinvented the new regionalism trend, the new idea of regionalism to formulate actually foreign policy with regional emphasis, particularly in terms of developing cross-border trade and economic relationship. So so therefore, with all these happening, we also saw the multiplicity of formal and informal regional governance or institutions, along with regional networks in different regions across the world. And these actually only have proven the point that there is an emergence of regional politics across the world. So therefore, we also witness the emerging regional projects and networks association across the world. For example, the SAARC, or the South Asian Association of Regional Council, then the ASEAN, the ECOWAS, the NAFTA, then the African Union, then the GCC, or the Gulf Cooperation countries, then OPEC, etc. So all of these are examples of what I just mentioned, the intensification and expansion of this new emerging trend of regionalism, or what we, as I said earlier, global regionalism. So, so therefore, historically also, these phenomena of regionalism have been coined with terminology in the past, like the League, Union, Confederation, Pax, Association, and so on and so forth. These have been the terminology used in terms of the emerging regional association and regional institutions. Therefore, globally also, we have seen the involvement of almost all governments in the development of these regional networks, resulting particularly in plural and multi-dimensional participation of most of them. So these emerging political churnings, so you can say, of governments have also in many ways given rise to a number of new puzzles and challenges, especially for these governments, and as to how these governments are going to deal with their foreign policy. So the most important of these, is we must understand is actually the definition and the interpretation of regionalism itself. So let us begin by discussing as to what is regionalism and how different scholars of international relations have actually discussed the characteristic of regionalism, as well as the impact of this regionalism, whether in politics or in economics. So basically, let us begin by understanding, as I said, that regionalism, if it has to be regionalism, should be characterized by involvement or participation of at least three contiguous governments, which means three governments that are neighbors to each other, or if not governments, then the non-government organizations, in order to devise a mechanism for what is quote-unquote sustained cooperations, formal or informal. So therefore, for what? For the purpose of multilateral gains, or for the purpose of mutual gains. So if I am going to engage with other countries, definitely I am going to engage with other countries because I understand that there is a profit, or I am going to gain from this particular relationship. I am putting much of the burden in building these associations, and naturally for the purpose of enhancing one's own economy, or for ensuring that there is security in terms of the long-term national politics. So therefore, for these reasons, as I said, these regional organizations or associations, or inter-nations institutions are being developed. So these involvements, should be characterized, as I said, by the formation of multilateral institutions. So without having, a center point where everybody's interest would be taken, equally, then the existence of this association will first of all not last, because it might be in the interest of the opponent, or it might be in the interest of other nations. So therefore, if one nation join hands with other nations in order to build such regional associations, then definitely there should be the meeting point or the center point of all their interests in the form of multilateral institutions, which means that these such institution will consider the interest of all members as equal, and will not necessarily favor one nations and be biased to another nation. So this is the purpose of any regional association. Persons like Jagdish Bhagwati, while defining regionalism, have argued that the setting up of such institutions, or what I said, a multilateral institution, should be determined by the preferential approach to trade agreement among a subset of nations participating in the process. So therefore, for Jagdish Bhagwati, the most important thing is that such institutions should be determined by the mutual interest that every nation would gain from having such an institution. By all the nations who are participating in this, they should be able to gain from it. So another very important scholar known as Joseph Nye, he believes that the states with contiguous geography definitely or certainly they have certain degree of dependency to each other, maybe because they share physical borders with each other, and therefore maybe migration might take place from one nation to the other, or maybe because it is landlocked, so therefore if there is going to be international trade, then it has to pass through through the other nation. So therefore there is certain degree of dependency among the contiguous countries, and therefore these interests, considering these interests of the contiguous nations, such associations are being created for enhancing the benefit of each other. So therefore, in order that they can tap these mutual potentials and take advantage of their political interconnectedness, what do these nations do? They establish a joint form of organization or a group of formations, you can say. Okay, so this is how regional association and how regional politics have actually been compelled to evolve. So historically speaking, regionalism have been classified by scholars into two periods. One is what is called as the traditional regionalism, and the other is what is known as new regionalism. So there are two types of regionalism which I want to discuss in this particular lecture, and one that is traditional regionalism and new regionalism. What is traditional regionalism? Traditional regionalism is actually based on the concept of European integration, which was backed by the Cold War confrontation between European countries. So during the Cold War period, we all have read in history that European countries, they tried their best to come together. They tried to integrate even other nations to join hand with them, but for their interests, not necessarily for the interests of the other nations who might have joined them. So this is basically for the purpose of proving which is the superpower, or because of the confrontation of the two superpowers, that is the USA and the Soviet Union. So therefore, such a concept of regionalism was prioritized, as I said, on the idea of securing strategic consideration. Strategic consideration, as I said, as I just mentioned, for enhancing the interest of that particular region itself. And therefore, as such, this concept was actually meant to promote regional integration with economic, political, and military security. In order that the Soviet Union would control, or in order that the United States of America would control the other nations of the world, naturally these three important areas are important. The integration of these three important areas are important, that is the economic, political, and military security. So therefore, as I said, this period put emphasis on relations based on ideology. on the ideology as you are completely capitalist or you are inclined towards socialist ideas of democracy, socialist ideas of economy. So therefore, the cooperation among countries with ideological loyalties within the region, and in the process the setting up of obstacles to prevent other countries from entering into these kinds of region or regional associations or regional league, whatever you call, when they do not conform to such ideological approaches, to such ideological underpinnings or to approaches, was actually the norm of that particular regionalism known as the old regionalism. I will not spend much time on that. We will rather discuss the new regionalism. So, as I said, the other form of regionalism is what is known as new regionalism, and it is based on a new phenomena taking place since the beginning of 1980. We all know that after the 1980s, there was the fall of Soviet Union, and therefore many things changed after that. So the formation and gaining popularity of regional associations like the ASEAN, the NAFTA, the APEC, and so on and so forth, in the post-Cold War period are the emerging trends of new regionalism. This new phenomenon of regionalism is very comprehensive in nature. They may be multifaceted and also multi-dimensional. It is not only economic, it is not only polity, it is not about ideology rather, but it is about the mutual interests of all the nations who join hand to form those kind of regional associations. So therefore, this implies that there is an increasing, homogeneity in terms of the outlook towards culture, security, economic policy, and even the nature of political regime itself during this phase of the emergence of new regionalism. Which means that despite the diversity that one country might be experiencing, or despite the major differences in terms of culture, in terms of language, in terms of the geography, in terms of the interest, and so on and so forth, all these are being compromised to project a homogeneous approach towards culture, security, economy, and even the nature of political regime, which means it is not anymore, based on ideology. Even if one nation is more inclined towards socialist approach or socialist ideology, yet that nation can be part of the regional association in order to enhance their interest at the regional level. So therefore, I can say that the new approach, emphasizing particularly on decentralization of international system, gained popularity as the new regionalism after the collapse of communism and the end of Cold War. And therefore, new regionalism as a multi-dimensional form of integration is also now driven by a wide range of different actors, from the individual to community and from local to global agents. It is not necessarily anymore about nation expressing their ideological alliances, but rather it is about nation, about individuals, about community, about non-state actors expressing their interest in being clubbed together under the regional association, as I said, for the purpose of enhancing their mutual interests. So therefore one can say that this can include sectors like economics, politics, even social sectors, cultural aspects, and therefore it goes far beyond the idea of free trade regime, far beyond the idea of security alliances. So, so therefore, the new form of regionalism is open. It is completely open. Anything can be brought and discussed in the center point or in the multilateral institution which consolidate the voices of different regions. So this is one part of my lecture where I am trying to locate the significance of regionalism in the post-Cold War period. Now we come to India's Loki's policy, the evolution of relationship and the strategies over the years. So historically, India's relationship with eastern neighbors have always existed, and this relationship can be traced far beyond the first century itself. The wave, of cultural and commercial engagement between India and its eastern neighbors can be described, as the first wave which lasted till the 12th century. So what I'm trying to say here is that India has always had relationship with Southeast Asia, especially through the commercial, through the cultural exchange and the commercial engagement between India and this particular region. And this relationship has lasted for almost 12 centuries. During this period, let me give you a few examples. During this period, the first Hindu empire, in what later became the Indo-China region, actually flourished entirely on cultural and philosophical context. There was an exchange of this, Hindu cultural heritage between Southeast Asia and India, especially through the form of the cultural and philosophical context, which means the exchange of philosophical ideas and the formation of the first Hindu empire in the Indo-China region. This empire was established not on any military action or war, but rather, as I said, on the ground of the engagement of culture and on the ground of the engagement of the philosophical ideas. South Indian Emperor Rajendra Chola's period, we have experienced the period of his periodic encroachment into the region, especially into the Srivijaya Empire in Malaya and Indonesia in the 10th and 11th century. As I said, this is the cultural and philosophical engagement, and it lasted till the 10th and 11th century. These are actually some of the living examples of how India have always had regional contacts with this region. So during this period, there was an expansion of Hinduism, which was followed by the spread of Buddhism to the east. Today, most of the Eastern nations professing Buddhism, it is because of this particular cultural exchange. So the religious and cultural philosophies travel both from India and China into these regions, and also India attain some of the expressions from those regions. So in many ways, therefore, this also led to the cultural synthesis of these two major systems of faith and belief. That is the, in terms of Hinduism, Buddhism, and then the contact with Confucianism, Feng Shui, and so many other religious cultures. So, so therefore, as I said, this synthesis of these two major systems of faith, that is Hinduism and Buddhism, have also left an imprint which is evident till today in this particular region. So one of the most significant couriers of culture from India during that particular period to South Asia and to other parts of China and Japan and so on and so forth was certainly commerce. Was certainly the commercial relationship that India had at that point of time with the people of that region. So therefore, this commercial link also facilitated the spread, as I said, the spread of Hinduism, the spread of Buddhism, and of course even the spread of Islam to Southeast Asia. This is the first wave of the relationship that India had with nations in Southeast Asia. The second phase of look east, or the second phase of India's relationship with the East, can be described as a period during the British colonialism. Because during this period, the Second World War engulfed East Asia rather extensively. The war, in many ways, also added strategic dimension to India's, or rather British, link with Southeast Asia. The British, grasped the strategic centrality of India in Asia, and they sustained their colonial presence, what is known today as the East of the Swiss, including Southeast Asia, on the basis of the Indian empire that they have conquered. So through this, the British also built India as the bastion of their power and influence in Asia. So India became the center, and the other network areas of the British were the neighboring societies, the neighboring nations in Asia and Southeast Asia. And therefore that also protected their colonial holdings as far in the east as possible up to Hong Kong, by controlling from India. So this is the second phase, and therefore during the second phase we can say that strategic interests were brought up front along with the commercial interests. But that was at the cost of the cultural and civilizational links, because the interest of the British was far different than having a people-to-people contact. The interest of the British was rather more about controlling the commercial benefits that they are going to gain from these regions. So the third wave of India's look east policy, we can say, began after independence, when India actually looked forward to carve a role for itself in the Asian continent. Nehru was seen immediately after, many countries became free. Nehru was seen as the architect of, first of all, we all know he was the architect of the non-alignment movement. Then as the leader of Free India, he was also the architect of independent India's foreign policy. Especially his outlook for Asia policy was based on his approach of building Asian solidarity. So Nehru was very keen about building Asian solidarity, and therefore this phase of Nehru can be called as the fourth phase of India's relationship with the Southeast Asia, and therefore this is India's fourth phase of looking at the East. So, therefore, with due regard for the aspirations of the newly independent and resurgent Asia, Nehru adopted a threefold vision for building relationship with the Eastern neighbors, which can be, characterized in this way. First, Nehru stressed on the assertion of India's geostrategic centrality to Asia. He understands that India is central to the geostrategic relationship of Asia with the rest of the world. The second important vision of Nehru was its deep historical and cultural ties with Southeast Asia. Nehru understood very well about India's relationship with Southeast Asia. So therefore, his outlook in terms of building the relationship with Southeast Asia was based on this particular vision or on this particular philosophy. And the third was the non-alignment policy, which had considerable appeal in Southeast Asia because newly independent countries of Asia wanted to keep away from the great power rivalries. So therefore, these three, fold vision of building a relationship with Eastern neighbors play a significant role in India's engagement with Southeast Asia immediately after India itself attained independence, and many other nations in Southeast Asia also were actually becoming free. Becoming free. So therefore, as I said, the first is, let us remember that the first is India's assertion of geostrategic centrality to Asia. Second is the historical and cultural ties that India has with Southeast Asia. And third is the non-alignment policy, trying to convince other nations also that we are not going to be biased towards one superpower or the other. So therefore, through all these, we can say that Nehru was significantly important in trying to evolve a policy towards Southeast Asia, because he insisted on harmony as a precondition to India's legitimate weight to world politics. So in order to build the relations for non-aligned states in the region, he underlined the role of regionalism and multiculturalism to enhance cooperation and mutual undertaking among these states. The fourth wave of India's Look East policy can be described as a period since, as I said from the very beginning, since the 1990s economic liberalization. So due to India's obsession towards Pakistan and China, of course, Southeast Asia did not figure much in India's foreign policy before that. After Nehru and before 1990s, Southeast Asia did not really play a significant role in India's foreign policy because of their obsession with Pakistan and China. However, Indian relationship viewed ASEAN as an American imperialist surrogate, while similarly ASEAN also dubbed India as the surrogate of the Soviet Union. So this kind of confrontation always existed between India and the countries in Southeast Asia. So therefore, as I mentioned again and again, with the sudden demise of Cold War, Indian policy makers evolved an alternative foreign policy framework towards this particular region. So Prime Minister P.V. Narasimha Rao can be said as the architect of the new India-Southeast Asia relationship, or he is the architect of the policy approach known as the Look East policy. And his emphasis on real politics instead of idealism marked a new shift, that of Nehruvian worldview in the 1990s. So therefore, ASEAN, along with countries like Japan, Korea, China, by then had emerged as economically most dynamic regions, not only in Asia, but also in the world. And therefore, with India being at the dire need for new opening because of the liberalization of its economy, Indian policymakers could not afford to ignore this region. And therefore, with all these circumstances, the Look East policy was evolved, and it became one of the most prominent and dynamic initiatives with regard to foreign policy, especially the shift of India's foreign policy post 1990 or post India's economic liberalization. Let me end here for this particular lecture. I will continue with the next one so that it would not be too long. Thank you very much.